Welcome back, everybody. If you could take your seats, we are now going to begin our first panel session. This is entitled The Innovation Culture for Entrepreneurs' Perspectives. We have an outstanding panel. I'm sure we'll want to give them plenty of time for your interaction. So let me start by introducing our moderator for this session. Turn it over to Mr. Dilawar Syed, the CEO of Yonja Media Group, a leading emerging markets social media company based in Silicon Valley and Istanbul. And he has too long and distinguished a CV here for me to read all of it, but I should point out that in 2010, President Obama appointed Dilawar to the President's Advisory Commission on Asian Americans. In this role, Dilawar drives Obama administration's engagement with the Asian American business community. Again, that's just one of many distinguished accomplishments of Dilawar, but I'll just go ahead and turn it over to him and let him introduce the rest of the distinguished panel.
Thank you so much, Larry, and thank you again for joining us. Welcome again to Stanford and to the Valley. Dr. Carrie-Ann Jones said this very aptly this morning, that this conference is about technology, and technology has the potential of solving real problems, small and large. So what we hope to do over the next 1 hour is, with this very distinguished panel, share with you how do we here in the Valley build on these next generation technologies and solutions, and how do we go about developing the products that are adopted by consumers worldwide. What is it about the culture of this place, the mindset, the processes that makes Silicon Valley and its people so effective at innovating? And what we're hoping is that through this discussion, which will be, we would like it to make it very interactive, perhaps we can identify some attributes of the Valley's culture that you could consider adopting to your daily professional lives, whether it's field workers, as policymakers, academics. So this is going to be a very interactive discussion. We have 1 hour. I have a few questions for our panelists, and then we want to dive right into a conversation with you. Let me spend a few minutes and introduce the panel to you, and then we will begin our questions. So I have Gina Bianchini next to me. Gina is founder of Ning. I'm sure many of you have heard this community of social media users. Obviously did very well, and now she's founder and CEO of Mightybell, a new experience sharing platform. I did play with it a little bit. It's very cool, Gina. Next to Gina, we have Giacomo Marini. Giacomo is founder and managing director of Noventi Ventures. It's an early stage Silicon Valley VC firm. And Giacomo has a long and a very distinguished track record of very successful ventures. He's been an investor, board member, or entrepreneur at a number of firms, and it's great to have him here. And I should also mention that, and it's a shout out to our good friend Richard Boley, that my understanding is that Giacomo worked with Richard when Richard was working on an entrepreneurship effort in Italy. So we'll get to hear his perspective from the European view as well. And next to Giacomo, we've got Vinita Gupta. We are very honored to have Vinita. Vinita is a pioneer woman leader in high tech. Originally came from India, founded a digital link, which is now called Quick Eagle Networks. Went public in 1994. The company was brought back in as private a few years back. She's very actively involved in a number of civic causes, including leadership for women in high tech. Vinita serves on the board of Palo Alto Medical Foundation, as well as let me make sure I get this right, Cancer Prevention Institute of California. So great to have Vinita on panel. And then finally, we have Vinny Lingham. So I got a note from Vinny last night, pretty late, saying, I have a new bio. So this is how the Valley works. So Vinny is now, maybe might be one of the very first public events to sort of share that, is the CEO of Gift. And 24 hours before this, and Vinny still is the founder of Yola.com, which is a community of essentially, Yola is a web tool small businesses use to build website, has over 2 million users worldwide. So he's making transition from Yola to Gift. And I should also mention that Vinny is originally from South Africa and is very much involved in developing entrepreneurship ecosystem in South Africa, and serves and is a co-founder of the Silicon Cape Initiative. Vinny has won many many awards, but I wanted to mention one that really I thought was very, very interesting. in 2006, Vinny was named the top young ICT entrepreneur in Africa. In 2008, Vinny was the ICT Personality of the Year in South Africa. And here's my favorite one. Vinny is a finalist for Men's Health Best Man in 2009. Perhaps we'll get to talk about that, Vinny. What is that award about? But
Okay, the startup diet's not working.
well, let's begin our discussion. And the first question is really to elaborate on our topic, which is about the innovation culture in the Valley. So I'm going to ask our panel, and I'll start with Gina. So Gina, how do you innovate? How do you drive your teams towards innovation on a daily basis, whether it was at Ning or now with Mightybell? And if you wouldn't mind sharing your example or your story with the folks here.
Sure. So I'm from Cupertino, so I grew up about 20 minutes south of here. So I'm officially a townie, and I have never, without very brief stints, not lived in Silicon Valley. So this idea of driving innovation, I don't know how you drive innovation. And specifically, I think you foster and you sort of throw wind at a flame of innovation more than you have to basically get a set of people together and be like, yeah, let's go innovate. I do think that there are two things about Silicon Valley's culture that create an environment of innovation, though. One is that typically people are taught to ask, and what is celebrated is asking forgiveness, not permission. And the more that you go and just do something, it's celebrated. Where I think in other places, and again, I'm not totally sure, because I haven't worked in a lot of other places, that it's about following a process. And I have seen as companies get bigger and sort of lose that same entrepreneurial energy, it's that movement from, we are a culture that asks for, that you just go do stuff and you ask for forgiveness, not permission, to moving to a culture that asks for permission. The other thing that I think is pretty profound about Silicon Valley is that most of the people that I've been surrounded by tend to ask the question, how is this going to disrupt the world? How is this going to be big? And essentially you get trained to sort of think in a mindset of, well, if this doesn't actually create, if we can't get 100 million people to use this within 6 months, then we might as well not even try. But that kind of energy and that kind of mindset, which basically says, how do we make this bigger? How do we make this more disruptive? I think is something that again, I'm not positive, but may be unique to this strange valley and sort of confluence of having San Francisco, 2 major research universities, and growing up with the defense and semiconductor industry sort of all at the same time. So it's like this weird combination of hippies and engineers and engineer hippies and all sorts of things in between. But I do think that these are the two big things that capture what I think makes this place pretty special today.
Thanks, Gina. And so, Giacomo, do you agree that it's a combination of how do you disrupt, how do you make things bigger, and ask for forgiveness and not seek permission? Would you agree?
Yeah, definitely these are very important elements, and the element of scale on which I will touch upon again. I also would like to move it a little bit. The Silicon Valley is a little bit less about innovation in on my book than it is about new enterprise creation. So innovation translates immediately to new enterprise creation. So if the engineer at Cisco has the greatest new idea for the new switch, he doesn't go to Larry Chambers and say, well, I have this great idea. He goes out and starts a company, okay, which promotes economic development, okay? So it's really about new enterprise creation. And many things are not invented in Silicon Valley. I mean, the internet was not invented in Silicon Valley, right? I mean, it was invented in Switzerland, right? But Switzerland didn't make the biggest economic advantage of it, okay? Silicon Valley did, because the Silicon Valley is a factory of new enterprises. What the fundamental skill of Silicon Valley is how do we build a new enterprise, put it together, and make it an attempt at creating a new leader in the marketplace. That's the essence of Silicon Valley. The second thing which Gina touched on, which is very, very important, is scale. So you always look for scale. Silicon Valley is not about creating small companies. Silicon Valley is about creating big company or fail in the process, and that's perfectly fine. That's perfectly fine. You fail and you start again. The third thing is that you create companies, you create new enterprises that have a network of stakeholders which is broad. So you don't create family companies in Silicon Valley. You create companies where large teams of people, investors, stakeholders, partners, all participate in this adventure of creating value around the equity value. So everything is about equity. So the investor and the inventor and the manager all make money on equity if they make money. And so these are some of the elements in my mind that distinguish. I mean, if you look for patents and inventions, you can go to Eindhoven, to the Philips laboratories in Eindhoven, or you can go to Shanghai University if you want. But that's not it. I mean, the difference here, you do translate that in successful companies. So I attempt to, many times, to create successful companies.
So I should mention here that I think we already see the fact that Giacomo is a venture capitalist. The enterprise creation point of view is a bit of a different angle than what an entrepreneur is sharing. So it's great to have you on the
We
panel
like
to see the other
economic
side as well.
development as well.
All right, Vinita, your turn on this.
Okay. Again, I'm an entrepreneur. I started company even before the internet started. My story starts with going back to the culture and what makes companies grow, first find how we start a company. I was working, I'm an immigrant, I was an immigrant from India at the time, and I'm a technologist, worked for large companies, and then after a while, there was a feeling of staleness. It felt like, I need to do something more significant, make much more difference in the world, and I didn't know what that meant. So then suddenly something happened in my life when I was an engineering manager, and my colleague, he got promoted for the new position that opened up while I thought I was the deserving candidate. And certainly, I was very disappointed, but then I thought, this shall pass too. But as the days went by, I felt worse about it. I felt, gee, I don't want to be doing this for the next few years, sitting here doing the same thing over and over. So suddenly there was a burning desire for a change. I wanted to do something different. I didn't start a company, and I can tell you 90% of the companies in the valleys don't start to make money. We want to do something significant in life and have fun and make a living. That's why that's generally the culture. So then I met my colleague, my partner, and he joined me in starting the company. And there is a point to this story. So he joined me in starting the company, and we did not have an idea. We didn't know what we were going to start a company. But the joint discussion of many founders generally make a better idea come out of it. So the innovation is overplayed. It is like we know the space a little bit. We have this burning desire to do something different than what we do. We have some knowledge, but we don't have that confidence that we can do it. But suddenly something starts making sense, and it's like, okay, let's give it a try. And we selected a hardware software platform that would provide data enabling capabilities. In those times, that was something that was new and upcoming. Little did we know that 6 years after that, internet would explode and our devices will be deployed in WorldCom, in Bell Canada, in British Telecom, Deutsche Telekom, to be the highways to become the enablers to the internet. So this is what led to our big success, being at the right, selecting the right product idea. But that came as a result of a joint discussion of a few people. And that happens more often than not. That makes better idea come about. There's another point, if I may make that quickly, is there is a thread of genuineness, I would say, integrity, trust, that sort of is prevailing in the Valley, and that seldom gets talked about. And no questions are bad questions. Everybody asks those questions. For example, when venture capitalists meet entrepreneurs to start a company, they don't sign any legal agreement. Everybody shares things around. There is a trust built in that they will not take idea of one entrepreneur and give it to another entrepreneur. So there is a mutual trust. We engage with technologists while we are still thinking of how we are going to do things, and they come about, they give you the ideas of how this might be done. They don't do the work, but they give you those ideas. They don't expect anything from us. We don't expect anything from them. But ideas are getting moving in the Valley. So that's the culture of the Valley. But the sense of integrity is very, very high. When I, as an immigrant, started a company, when I could afford a person to manage the facility, as soon as the person walks in, whom I did not know before, I hand over the key of the facility and I never look back. The first person who walks in to do the accounting books for me, I hand over the checkbook to that person, and I never look back. And then the stories go on, but the point of this is that having a culture of authenticity, genuineness, sincerity, it basically accelerates the decision making. The decision making, I believe this is one of a very, I would say, one of the very profound reason why the companies get formed and become successful at a much faster pace in the Valley than anywhere else.
Thank you, and it's a great point you bring up with respect to the trust factor, which I think is almost fairly unique to this place, and it sort of facilitates this conversation. Thanks, Vinita. We have Vinny now. Vinny, if you wouldn't mind sharing your perspective on the culture, and what is it about this place that makes it so effective at fostering innovation, if you will?
So I've been living here for just over 4 years, and I came from South Africa, moved across. So I'll speak to my experiences and what drove me to, leave my family, my friends behind, in a 36-hour commute away, and move out to Silicon Valley. Now, I'd obviously come out a couple of times before I decided to move, and I just realized that the culture was more conducive to what I was trying to build with my next company, and that was to build a business of scale, as some of the speakers mentioned before. And one of the things I couldn't achieve in South Africa is I couldn't achieve scale on a number of levels. We didn't have the workforce, so if we expanded the company quickly or we needed to hire a whole bunch of engineers, we couldn't do that. We didn't have the number of users, so we couldn't even target the product to the local market. I mean, just to give you an idea, we have at Yola, we have 7 million users today, actually not 2, 7 million users today, of which only about 400,000 or 300,000 are South African users. So if we had stayed there, and we have local competitors there who've got small number of users, they can't scale the way we can. They don't have the number of engineers, they don't have the sort of growth that we can get from the global market as opposed to a local market. So what attracted me to the Valley was the opportunity to build a big company and have access to the capital, the people, the networks, the knowledge. And then the last thing on that list, why I wanted to move here, was the liquidity. South Africa and pretty much the rest of the world, from what I can see, in the tech sector, there's a fear of tech. People don't understand it. They still see it as very risky. And therefore, valuations are not great for entrepreneurs. So if you do build a good technology company outside the Valley, you don't get the same valuations you get in the Valley. And that's probably largely due to the fact that a lot of countries don't have a good M&A infrastructure around technology and technology companies with large market caps looking to buy startups. I know like in South Africa, for example, there's a lot of small M&A happening, but the entrepreneurs sell their company for fractions. And when I say fractions, I'm talking about 5% or 10% of what they'd get for the company if it was based in the Valley. And that's just because we don't have very often having valley companies come in and buy local companies in other parts of the world. They're just, they're very locally focused. So you'll see a lot of M&A happens in this region. And obviously, there are exceptions to the rule, but and the M&A part is important. I mean, the M&A part is what keep entrepreneurs going. Lots of entrepreneurs, their cycle is build a company, sell it, build another company, sell it, and so on and so forth. And that's what drives them. That culture is just not prevalent as much as is in the Valley outside. And obviously, that's a generalization. You get parts of India and China now that are, M&A is stepping up there, and entrepreneurs are building great companies there and in other parts of the world. But I think what's made the Valley successful up to now, even though the rest of the world is catching up in many respects, has been to a large degree the M&A activity and the infrastructure. Just a last point, Cape Town has, I think I know of one M&A shop. That's one sort of transactional advisory service. It's two guys, and they get called in, once every 2 months to do a deal. That's the sort of deal flow, because the culture there is labor's, relatively cheap. Well, why should we pay someone a premium for their technology? We can just build it ourselves or replicate it. And because these companies don't achieve scale and they don't threaten the incumbents, there's no reason to buy them out. So incumbents tend to move a lot slower, they know that they don't have to buy. And whereas in the Valley, if you don't buy Facebook when they're selling to you for $1 billion, before you know it, they're worth 100. And that's that's really what differentiates the Valley, I think.
Thank you, Vinny. My next question is more about the evolution of the culture in the Valley. You can see this by just the folks who are here. Many of us have international backgrounds. Over the last 10 years, roughly half the companies founded in the Valley had at least one co-founder who was not born in the U.S. The Valley now produces brands that have global footprint. So there's a lot of influences that's capturing from the international in, if you will. So my question to the panel is, if you fast forward, let's say 2030, how do you envision this place, given the fact that we are now living in a very dynamic global place here, and we are obviously interfacing with the world at large. So how do you see the culture evolving, shall I say, 10 or 20 years from now?
So I tend to only like to work in intervals of 5 years. So let's just start there, maybe. Because, when I think about the difference between 2007 and 2012, I mean, the scale, the reach, the perspective is some of the things that we thought about in 2007. We're like, oh, this would be a really interesting thing to try. And now you just have massive mainstream appeal, for example, of social networking and social software. I think one of the things that certainly the international focus in has been a really important piece of Silicon Valley. I also think, though, that maybe something that's not that appreciated is the fact that most software companies, and certainly like internet software companies, are global day one. Probably no one in this audience has heard of Mightybell yet. We've been up for about 3 months. We already have registered users in 175 countries. And that's for something that, is brand new. And so, one of the things that I think is so profound is the fact that everybody is global day one, and the access to international markets exists today for, an individual in their house, living anywhere in the world, as long as they have an internet connection. And I think that one piece, that one fact, is going to have such a fundamental impact on what gets created from here. And one of the things that I think was one of those moments that was profound from my perspective is, typically in the world we think about things as political, social, or economic. And what the internet has essentially done, and social technology, I believe, is accelerating this, is we're moving from those being 3 separate things to those being essentially one thing. So, it really came to be crystallized for me, at least, whenever it was, I think it was 6 months ago. I turned to my team and I was like, when has a sitting president of the United States flown out to a suburb, a California suburb, and launched his re-election campaign from the offices of a commercial enterprise? You would never think that, Eisenhower wasn't flying to GM to basically launch a political campaign in the late 50s. And I think that is that merging of the political, the economic, and the social, and also when you layer on top of it just a global footprint for any individual anywhere in the world day one, those are the reasons why I can't predict what's going to happen, let alone in 2030, but what's going to be the case in 12 months or 24 months. Because the rate of innovation, when you have that kind of breadth and that kind of opportunity for innovation to come from wherever and disruption to come from whatever, both good and bad, I think there's something profound about that we have just not dealt with as a global population before. And it's both incredibly exciting and it's like, hold on to your hats because we're all going for a ride. And that to me is something I think about a lot, and also makes it that I think one of the key things going forward is just going to be openness and flexibility and the ability to process very quickly what is the impact of a new application or a new website or a new mobile interface on the world when you think about things in that kind of a framework.
Good point. And I would just make an observation here that even though we have now often a time majority of the users for new products coming from outside the US, it still remains to be the case that when the products are first launched, they're launched with a US, and I would say not even just US, this area mindset. So I'm going to take a position here, and Mark may not appreciate this, but Facebook was built, LinkedIn was built for communities that were very much in the U.S., and the rest of the world adopted, and we hope that they would adopt after translation. So there's been this idea of localization versus building stuff out, international out, and that's sort of what I was leading to, is that I think 10, 15 years from now, and this is where I see in my work in Turkey, is that we will need to create products where we are not localizing after the fact, but rather we are developing stuff that actually people can relate to from day one. Like as you said in your new product, it has such a global footprint from day one. And I think that is something which is still a process and a transition here, but it will need to scale a little bit more given just the sheer number of folks who are coming in and adopting this technology from day one. And on this note, if Giacomo, you wouldn't mind sharing your perspective.
So I would say I don't know that anything is fundamentally changing except for the fact, because it's built in Silicon Valley, the fact that you reinvent yourself every 5 years. So both in terms of the sector focus, so okay, you started with the semiconductor guys, okay, got the PCs, got the software, got the networking, got the biotech, got now the social internet, communication, evolution, and you find people that were doing semiconductor that now are doing clean tech, or that are doing social networking, if you want. So people reinvent themselves in a way that often is strange, right? What do you know about that? And sometimes you don't know. You just think about it, and you just create, and you just trying to do something new. I would touch on being global from day one. I totally agree with that, and certainly that was not the case 30 years ago. And in fact, in 1988, The Economist wrote an article on Logitech that I was a co-founder of that said this was a startup that was global from day one, because we started in Europe, we moved to the US right away, we had engineering in Europe and in the US, we had manufacturing in Asia, we were selling in 29 countries after 5 or 6 years. So we were really a little bit of an exception, and it was noticed. But today, if you are a social network, it's even beyond Facebook, because now, you are global from day one. And if you go outside of the software products, more on the hardware products or things like that, there are many situations in which the US is not necessarily the early adopter market anymore, or not the largest market. In some spaces, China is from day one, the largest market right away. So that's a little bit of a change. And a little bit, if I could say, on a cultural side as well, 25, 30 years ago, the model was the engineers are from everywhere, okay, India, China, Europe, whatever, but the sales guys are Americans and the marketing guys are Americans. That's gone. Okay, now there is much more of a mix, and everybody's everywhere, and regardless of where they came from.
I'm going to pick up on that point, and actually it's a great segue into Vinita, and you have exposure to obviously India being from there. We've seen this in the last 10 years and before when India started to emerge as a player on the tech scene. It was an offshoring shop for most part. However, now, and I've got my investor who's going in and pouring in millions of dollars on startups that are thinking India and globe out from day one, from Bangalore and Delhi and other parts of India, and for that matter, that region. So if you wouldn't mind sharing any experiences that you think, how will that affect, if you will, the culture of innovation and when it comes to the Valley as well, Vinita?
Very few people would appreciate that even as little as 15 years back, this valley was very US focused. We came from outside, but we gelled in and became part of this valley. We didn't look beyond this valley that much. Today, I claim that people didn't understand when we said tandoori chicken, what it meant. But today in the valley, everybody understands what tandoori chicken means. That's the most famous Indian dish. So it's become, there is a lot of back and forth transportation besides understanding, getting feedback of what different markets are and whether the products we are developing here have a global appeal or not. As we said, Gina said, it is there today. You can find out very quickly because of the tools available. But there is a lot of VCs who are going from the US to India and investing in Indian companies. And so they bring in the thoughts and ideas. They are also the transporters of culture, of Silicon Valley culture in there. The way we talk, I talked about the authenticity, integrity, asking the questions. They start asking the questions, and now people in India do the same thing. So everybody is learning from each other, not just by the web tools, but by actually people going there. I know a lot of people who are traveling all the time to China. The flights to China are full. There are many more flights going to India now. There are direct flights to India. All these things are enablers of our global thinking. The fact that today we are sitting in this room in the heart of Silicon Valley and doing a Rio 2.0 is a big change. These things don't happen in this valley very often. We don't think about such a global focus. So my thesis is that we are moving at a very rapid rate in adapting to what the world needs from us and what we can offer to the world.
So Vinny, in your case, I'm going to change the question just a bit, given the fact that you're from South Africa, and obviously we've gone through this incredible transformation in North Africa recently. So given what's happening in Africa, and it's a continent that's lagging, and it's clearly a priority for UN when it comes to development, and also the fact that you have this initiative, the Cape Silicon Initiative, do you see an opportunity where the Valley could play a more collaborative role in sort of assisting Africa's rise or its emergence as a place where technology could help solve some of the problems that region faces?
Look, there's definitely a lot of learnings. I mean, in our situation, we have engineers on both sides. We have engineers in Cape Town and in San Francisco, and they work together around the clock to deliver solutions. So there's a lot of skills transference. But there are downsides. I mean, we moved a product guy from eBay. We hired here in the Valley, and we shipped him down to Cape Town, and then, summarily 6 months later, he gets offered 50% more at one of the local companies because they're so starved for skills. So the difficulty with skills transference is if Valley companies try and, we try and move individuals down into a place where there's a huge dearth of skills, the big companies snap them up. So as a startup entrepreneur, I'm a bit scared to put people down there for fear of that happening. So we rather train people on the ground there in the ways as opposed to sending people there. So I'm not sure that that sort of gives you some answer to the question. Let me think. How can we work with Africa a lot better? Here's the thing about the Valley. Okay, maybe this is a purely capitalistic approach, but I think that the good we do in the Valley, everyone in the world benefits from. Okay, you look at Facebook, you look at the social networks, the stuff that happens here, by default goes elsewhere in the world. Now, there are entrepreneurs in those countries. Do not underestimate them. They will find the gaps. They will build the solutions. They will create the bridges if those bridges make commercial sense. So I'm not a huge fan of aid in Africa from a government perspective, but having been there, lived there my whole life, because I know the corruption and how it doesn't reach the people that need it. I know maybe there's some regulations that we could bring in from this side, but again, the Valley doesn't get involved in politics. Yep. So this is one of the things that Silicon Valley entrepreneurs don't do. We just sort of carry on building businesses.
That is terrific. In fact, I'll just mention that the State Department has done some really cool stuff recently by taking delegations from the Valley who actually go and hear entrepreneurs out who are trying to fill that gap, in terms of whether there is something that's missing, that folks are not adopting things in the way they should be given their local context, and actually taking the VCs from Sand Hill to Tunisia to Morocco and have them listen to these pitches and actually make investments on the spot. So I think there are definitely opportunities for collaboration, but you make a great point that what we're doing here is in effect helping folks everywhere, and if there are gaps, there's an opportunity that we could help fill those gaps. This is a time where I'm going to open it up for Q&A, and we expect to hear lots from you. But just as you guys get prepared, I do want to read a retweet to my question that we had put out there that came out. Mike Dubé from Stanford GSB mentioned that in Mike's view, innovation is about the energy, encouragement, and resources to act on seemingly wild ideas without worrying about failure. I just wanted to share that. I think it builds on some of the things that were mentioned by our panelists. So please bring your questions, and we will continue the discussion.
Hello, I'm Nathan Freitas with the Guardian Project. I think a lot of the discussion here maybe has missed the idea that different countries or cultures have different value systems, and that as technology emerges from these, they might represent different values than Silicon Valley has traditionally. So I'd be curious what you think either different cultures have to offer that might be new, or the risks where we see sort of versions of the internet that aren't quite as open or free as we hope, and sort of the opportunity and the risk of cultural-based technology innovation.
Could you give an example of where you think that there's a culture with a different value system that sort of stems from where your question's coming from?
Well, we've seen things like Iceland is emerging as a sort of free haven for journalism. They're kind of, they have different rules around access. We've obviously seen, I think, different types of social networks emerge where maybe text messaging is more important, or ways of conversing, or in the sense of Twitter, if you're writing in Chinese, is not microblogging. It's actually quite long. So there's, just the language itself can have different impacts. So I'm hopeful about it, but I'm also, we've seen non-productive uses of around cultural values on the internet as well.
I generally look at internet and specifically social technology as something that, our job here in Silicon Valley, or as product designers or product practitioners, entrepreneurs, our job is, I believe, to get out things that are new and interesting systems, and that do not have an opinion about how they're going to necessarily be used. Then when you layer people on top of it and culture on top of it, these things should be able to be used for good or evil, because on some level, if you can use something for good or evil, it basically means that the technology has a profound way of organizing people. Then, as a human being, the goal is to train the good people on how to use it more effectively than the bad people. But I think about those two things as very different, because I think that when you look at just any culture, it is about the people who are there. It's about the norms that you create. It's a little bit harder to do that in software. Not impossible, but certainly a little bit harder to do that. I also think that the reality is that if anything, this kind of globally connected social software has the potential to shine a light on bright spots and have things that people sort of want to do, or that can be done more efficiently and effectively, to spread so much faster than was ever possible before. So I really do look at it as, making sure that, people know how to use this stuff effectively, and being really smart about those kinds of things.
Can I just add to that?
Please, Vinny.
So the way I look at it is, when I look at Silicon Valley in particular, and just because this region is full of people who are open, in many with regards to their beliefs. It's a huge pool of diversity here. There's people from all over the world here, and in the companies that we build, their views are taken into account. So when you look at a company like Facebook, for example, there are probably people from 100 different countries, I would imagine there. So when they do things, they do have an insight into the different cultures that are out there. That said, I think that the philosophy of the Valley and the culture of the Valley is neutral to the extent, so I agree with Gina quite a bit there. It's neutral to the extent, but to take it a step further, I think it's also the lowest common denominator from what I'm seeing in the rest of the world. So when technology is built in other countries, it inherently has a cultural bias to that country and those laws. And typically those laws are not as free, I would say, as the laws in the US. But particularly, even though the laws in the US might be, for example, SOPA was discussed, the Valley revolted against it. And the Valley sort of becomes the guardian of at least a lowest common denominator for the rest of the world to build on. And what you do find then is great companies taking their cultural, their cultural instincts and building on top of platforms. So look at, look at Facebook as a platform. There are companies built on top of Facebook's the Facebook Connect and built on top of Facebook from other parts of the world that are being very successful in their markets, but because of the neutral infrastructure that the Valley provides. So I think when it comes to the culture here, I think we do strive for a neutral culture because of the diversity of people here.
Yeah, my name is Chris Singh, and I work for IBM Research here in Silicon Valley. And let me briefly introduce what I do at IBM, and then I'll come back to some of the comments made about Silicon Valley and innovation. So at IBM, I am part of the research team, but I also lead a global organization called USRio, and I'll urge all of you to go to the website. It stands www.thesrii.org. Service Research Innovation Institute. What we have done is we brought all major IT companies, IBM, HP, Microsoft, Cisco, SAP, Oracle, you name it, as well as major research organizations and government organizations around the world, to look at IT as a service, not just IT as a technology. What's the value of IT for healthcare versus government versus telecom and agriculture, collectively, not individually. Today we do a very good job in building,
Would you mind asking the question? Because there are a few questions. I want to make sure we get as many questions as we can.
Yeah, so my question is more about, so I just wanted to share the innovation part, and I would urge all of you to connect and share your ideas around how we drive innovation. The discussion about Silicon Valley innovation, I have been in Silicon Valley since for the last 30-some years, and I've seen the growth of Valley here right before my own eyes. What makes Silicon Valley so unique from anywhere in the world, it has one of the top 2 universities. It has the best VC companies, one on Sand Hill Road. It has most of the big IT companies that started here, Intel, Cisco, Sun, and many others. So this place has some so unique in terms of some of these qualities. This attracts the best mind from all around the world to come here, right? My request to all of you and many people from overseas, how do we create this sort of a structure, infrastructure, culture, mindset in different parts of the world? So we have a mini Silicon Valley in Africa or Zambia or Thailand and Vietnam, to drive the so-called innovation in that regional part of the world.
So can we replicate Valley? And Giacomo, if you wouldn't mind taking a stab at this.
Yeah, so I've had innumerable speeches about how to replicate Silicon Valley, and the rest of the world. My comment to this is that, what makes Silicon Valley, it's a complex ecosystem that cannot be explained by 3 variables or by 15 variables. It's probably 100 variables, and the availability of capital, the university is fine, but also the licensing system that the university have. It's not just about capital, it's about the M&A companies that acquire, the culture of openness, the culture of innovation, be global from day one. it's a complex ecosystem. So, and sometimes there is again, the thinking that maybe it's about technology. It's not about technology, it's about forming new companies and all that type of stuff. So the replicating the ecosystem, understanding the ecosystem and replicating it is a little bit more complex than it looks at this, on the surface, and it has lots of variables. So all these variables are important, not just one of them, not just 10 of them. There is more than 10. And some of them are cultural, some of them are structural, some of them are unique to the US. I mean, my daughter goes to school, and at school, I mean, you think you can do anything, okay, right? I mean, there is no limitation on what you can do. I mean, so you grow up a little bit that way, and that propagates in the way people operate. So there is not one variable, there is not few variables, there are lots of variables, and that's why it's more complex to replicate, and that's why when it moves and replicates, it takes a little bit of a different shape. Now, the situation in Israel is a little bit different than it was 20 years ago. 20 years ago, there was an Israeli model in which you create a company in the US with the R&D in Israel, but now Israel is much more self-standing. So what that shows is that the model there was adopted and built and evolved over time and adjusted a little bit. And I think that that's the way to replicate this, is to try to understand it, but really it takes time. I mean, it took 50 years in the US to get it where we are today. I mean, and it was a little bit different, but it was not done in one day.
Okay, we have more questions. There's a hand over here, and then I thought there were folks asking questions up front as well. But this is the next person over here, if you don't mind, please, after you. And then we'll... Yeah. That's our hand. Sorry.
My name is Greg DeLon. I'm with Forefront Creative Solutions Laboratory and also representing the Band of Angels investor group. I've been working internationally in parts of Latin America and Italy. So this is particularly directed towards Mr. Marini, but all of you. And really a follow-up question to the last one related to a lot of the municipal and regional governments that I was working with had that question, how can we be the next Silicon Valley? Which is a bit absurd because of the realities that produce Silicon Valley here. But nevertheless, they are looking for ways, and regional and municipal governments, but let's say decision makers at a regional level, what are your recommendations for how they can best then, if they can't become one, how can they participate or benefit or link into at the tools they have at their disposal at the municipal and regional planning level?
Well, I mean, one of the ways is get out of the way to a certain extent, in the sense that, I mean, free up the situation. I mean, because we had an investment in France a long time ago. It took us 2 years to close a company in France. 2 years to close a company in France. I mean, companies fail, okay? You need to be able to close them relatively quickly. So some of it is just free up the entrepreneurial system, the way you form company, you disband company, you fund them, you make them hire people or fire people, and so on and so forth. I mean, it's the reality of it. I mean, if you don't have that flexibility, it's going to be very, very difficult. The other thing is that don't get stuck on what you think is the formula, okay? I mean, you go to Europe and people think that incubators are the key to success. Where is the incubator concept? You want the entrepreneur that wants to put their sign on the door, okay, and not a shared sign on the door. They want their sign, okay. So this is going to be the company that is going to dominate. So providing infrastructure. The other thing is that financing schemas. Sometimes the financing schemas outside of the US that the public is oriented towards real estate. The first thing that they fund you is the fact that you build a building. Okay, that's the last thing that you should be doing, right? Okay, so fund the company, don't fund the buildings. Okay, the real estate people will fund the buildings. Otherwise, you'll spend all your time and your money in the wrong direction from day one. So again, it's a lot of value. So the problem is there is not a simple answer to that question. There are lots of variables, but many of them is just make it easy for people to be entrepreneurial.
There's actually just a There is actually a really great book that I highly recommend if people are interested on this topic called Dealers of Lightning. And it was written as the definitive account of Xerox PARC. And I think actually does a great job of articulating, what are the different factors that they were sort of able to kind of tap into in Silicon Valley before it was really Silicon Valley and before anybody sort of cared. And I totally agree. I mean, I don't think it's a government, any kind of government basically being like, yes, we're going to create in this little spot Silicon Valley or replicate Silicon Valley. But I do think this book is really good. The other thing that I would say in terms of, Silicon Valley today is absolutely desperate for great engineering talent. And we will look anywhere in the world for great people. And, ideally they would move here, but immigration is an entirely different topic in which to
I'd like to tackle that in a second.
talk about. But just even, with tools like Google Hangouts and Skype and other, other ways of interacting, anything that can be done that helps with just allowing for any company to pull from global talent around engineering, especially if anybody knows any Ruby on Rails developers, please talk to me after. But that's actually something that's incredibly important today.
So dealers of Lightning, right?
Dealers of Lightning.
Okay. We've got a couple of minutes. I mean, that will hopefully have you answer the question. If you don't mind, let me take two more questions. There was a hand here and over there. And if we run out of time, our panelists will be here, and you can definitely ask questions. Please.
So my name is Timo Mäkelä. I actually work for the European Union, and of course try to prepare European Union for the Rio, but also in other capacity, I try to think very hard within the European Union context, how can we promote the innovation to address the challenges that the European Union is facing, societal challenges. And my question is really related to putting that into a Silicon Valley context, and also in mind of us now trying to prepare for Rio. Obviously there's a problem out there, so we are not globally in the path of achieving sustainable development, be it economic, social, or environmental, and policy perhaps as well. From your experience, what, if anything, governments, public authorities, actors at large can do to spur and accelerate innovation to a direction that these challenges are kind of calling us to try to do, or just not stand on the way as was a reaction from your side? Innovation is, of course, or companies, I would argue that any innovation, of course, is a good thing as such, but we do have these challenges that we need to try to address, and of course there the innovation and the businesses stemming from those innovation can play and need to play a role. So my question is, what is the role in this game for governments such as myself representing here the
It's a
European
trillion-dollar question, and I'm just going to pose it to everybody. Just give me like a couple of words. If there's one thing you would ask, besides getting out of the way, but is there something that governments could do? And just briefly, let's start with Vinny and then Vinita, and just very quickly if you can share. If you don't have an opinion, that's fine.
I'll pass this one.
Okay.
I would say simplification of how to form a company, how to simplify tax laws so that the entrepreneur is not bogged down with filing tax returns, hiring employees. These are general factors which are very simple here to do, which may not be, and I'm not an expert in that, but I would say, but other countries struggle with that. They make these things very hard.
I would say the regulations or deregulation of the financial markets. I know that this is an unpopular topic, but what Sarbanes-Oxley has done to limit the IPOs in the US while trying to to fix a problem that deal with that, with huge companies like Enron and WorldCom. I mean, has been a disaster together with the immigration, restriction after 9/11. So I think that one needs to look at you cannot have Silicon Valley without taking risks. Okay, you have to understand this, that this is, you have to take risks. And so if you take risks in the financial markets or being able to bring up to the public market companies that may fail 5 years later, you have to accept that. You cannot want Silicon Valley and not want some of the consequences that come with it. There are 100 companies that will go public and will do well. 10 of them will be a disaster for the investors. That's fine. If you don't accept that concept, I mean, you are not going to have it.
So Gina, besides training more Ruby on Rails developers, can the government do something?
I mean, I think that tackles it. I mean, the only other thing that I would add is, innovation isn't some big, monolithic thing that, it's one thing or the other thing. I am sure that there is something that every single person in this room can do with the people that either work for you or that, is around an area that you have some influence on, that you could probably do something to, again, encourage people to either, to experiment more, to take more risks, to, to remove or simplify something. And all of those little things, and I think that kind of goes to the part of there's so many variables at play here, that all of those little opportunities to simplify or encourage people that work with you to take a risk drives innovation. And if you try to do it top down, it doesn't work. And bottoms up actually has much more effectiveness and will also, I think, create more visibility into the things that are ultimately going to be the big things that have an effect on it.
So this might be our last question, burning question over there, please.
My name is Anir Chaudhary. I'm from the Prime Minister's office in Bangladesh. Now, you're all entrepreneurs, so you build companies, sell companies. So innovation happens through some sort of incentives. So without incentives, I don't see innovation happening. You used to build products for enterprises, for individual users. But as social networking becomes a reality around the world, you're building products for communities and also for groups of users. So you are starting to think like governments in a sense. Since there are a lot of government delegates here, one question that I have is, innovation must happen within government as well. So we've been talking about innovation as the, I guess, the only culture within the private sector or NGO, and that's probably not the case. I mean, governments do a lot of innovation within themselves. So what would your advice be to government delegates that creating an incentive mechanism within the government so that innovation can happen in a more natural way? I mean, I don't know if you've thought about it, but it would be interesting to hear your thoughts on that. Thank you.
Great question, Vinny. Would you like to?
Yeah, okay, first of all, I disagree with the notion that that you need to incentivize innovation. I think that's, the entrepreneurs that I meet and the ones that I hang out with are self-driven, and we innovate because that's just what we do. This is who we are. And I don't think any incentive from government's going to change it. In fact, I think often government incentives, hamper what we do because it gives people who, other entrepreneurs an edge which they shouldn't have. And I like competing in a meritocracy where everyone's fair and even, because typically incentives only apply to a few and not everyone. So what I think about governments and versus companies. So why can a small startup grow and take on a big company? Just because the more people you have, the slower things move. More discussions, more protocol, more processes. And startups are these agile, nimble organizations, 5, 10, 15, even 100 people who can get a lot done with as few resources as possible and become very effective at innovation. Now, governments are multitudes bigger than the biggest companies out here. And governments tend to move slower, obviously, than even big companies. Now, if you want to innovate at a government level, you need to look at what, you need to see yourself as an enabler of the smaller companies, because there's no way that you want to be the ones doing the innovation. You want to leave that up to the entrepreneurs and the CEOs running the big companies. So definitely, as people said before, break down those walls, break down those barriers, and I suppose just leading into one of the questions I was asked earlier on about what can other parts of the world do to create Silicon Valleys, or how can you how can you build this outside the US? I think you've got to look at what the biggest weakness or risk is for Silicon Valley. In my opinion, Gina touched on this early on, the biggest risk for Silicon Valley is we're running out of talent. Startups can't hire. We can't get people locally. My previous company, we're importing in people from Florida now, and that's the East Coast, because we've got to get people that far out to come to Silicon Valley to help us build the company. Engineers, we cannot get them. So immigration becomes a big issue. I mean, I've had my personal experiences. In 2009, I raised $20 million for my company, and my extension for my work permit expired, and I couldn't get a renewal. So I was stuck in South Africa waiting to get back to the US, and I've got all this money to spend on hiring people in the US and creating jobs, and I was locked out. And the worst part about it is the money was foreign capital. So it was foreign capital coming into the US to create US jobs, and I couldn't get a visa. Eventually, that's all been resolved, and I've got a green card now. But now, out of a 90-person company, my number one employee can't get a green card because she's applied to Stanford, and she now has a J1 visa pending. And anyway, my point is, immigration is immigration is
clearly
the
a very
biggest risk.
important topic to all of us. Gina, you have the last word, and we have to wrap up after this.
I'll just even give you guys a really small example. To come and speak here today is the only time I've had to sign a document that was at least one page, and it had all of this stuff just to come and talk. Like, I work about 5 minutes away from here, and this is the first time that I've actually had to sign this like really complex release to come and talk to you guys today. That doesn't happen in most of the informal meetups that I go to or anything that we speak to. So one thing you guys could change right now, today, is that kind of paperwork related to just getting together and having a conversation.
Well, that's a clear call to action. And on that, on that note, thank you very much. I hope you'll be around, and you can certainly interact. But thank you for joining and for your participation. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Let's have a round of applause for the panel. Great. While the panel is going back and we're getting the mics on the new panel, I want to introduce you may have noticed in the schedule for tomorrow that there is an unconference. And